Welcome to The Foundry by Forge College. Grab your digital hard hats and wrenches, folks, because today we are officially becoming blockchain plumbers. In our previous lesson, Privacy and Efficiency in Taproot, we explored how Taproot elegantly shrinks down transaction data by hiding alternate spending paths. But today, we really need to connect that lesson to the physical constraints of the Bitcoin network itself. How does shrinking data actually affect the entire global system? Well, that's exactly what we're going to figure out in this explainer on understanding network efficiency. Here is our engineering blueprint for today. We'll start with the network efficiency challenge, look at throughput versus latency, introduce our pipes, buckets, and headroom analogy, put the math into action, and finish up with synergistic network effects. Let's get right into it. Kicking things off with Section 1, the Network Efficiency Challenge. To truly grasp Bitcoin's macro capacity, we really have to look past the code and focus on the actual physics of a globally decentralized network. We know from our last lesson that Taproot shrinks transaction data by hiding alternate spending paths and consolidating witness data, right? But how does that impact the actual plumbing? Well, when complex script branches are revealed less often, the average size of data per transaction goes down, and that directly affects how many transactions can literally fit into a single block. Moving right along to Section 2. Throughput versus latency. If you want to evaluate network efficiency, you have to intimately understand these two competing forces. Honestly, just think of them as volume versus speed. Throughput is how much work gets done, like the total number of transactions processed per second or the raw bytes confirmed in a block. Latency, on the flip side, is how fast that work spreads and settles across the whole network. It's the time it takes for a transaction to be relayed, tossed into a block, and actually seen by a majority of peers. They're totally separate measurements, but they are highly, highly interdependent. And you can clearly see that interdependency right here. Changing one metric almost always messes with the other, forcing us to balance bandwidth, CPU, and memory trade-offs. Take block size, for example. A higher nominal block size limit raises your potential throughput ceiling. You can pack way more in. But it can inadvertently increase propagation latency because those heavier blocks take longer to physically send across the network. A smaller average witness size, however, increases throughput and might even slightly reduce propagation time. See, it's a massive balancing act. All right, Section 3, pipes, buckets, and headroom. To make this abstract network stuff crystal clear, we need to talk about a concept called headroom. Before building anything, every good engineer plans for it. Headroom is simply the spare capacity in your pipes and the extra slack in your buckets. You absolutely need this so your digital pipes don't burst, or in network terms, crash or severely delay, when traffic gets unexpectedly heavy due to a sudden burst of transactions. So let's map out our plumbing schematic here. In our model, bandwidth, the physical network connection between peers, is the pipe. Block size, or mempool capacity, is the bucket. And spilled water? Well, that represents wasted mining effort, which we called orphaned blocks. If the water doesn't make it securely into the bucket in time, it spills out, and all that computational effort is entirely lost. Which leads us to a very practical real-world question. What happens if you increase the bucket size without widening the pipes? Imagine you just make the bucket much larger so it can hold more transactions, but you keep a really narrow pipe feeding it. The water takes way too long to arrive. This causes massive delays in block propagation. And in a decentralized network, if a block takes too long to reach other miners, they might find a competing block in the meantime. The ultimate result? Spilled water, wasted energy, and reduced overall security. Not great. Now for Section 4, the math in action. So, how do we actually fix this without forcing everyone to run super expensive fiber optic cables to their nodes? Let's run a quick stress test on our plumbing system. Step 1. Suppose our baseline transaction size sent to miners is 500 bytes. Now, Step 2, we apply a Taproot-style witness size improvement, shrinking the average data by 20% for common transactions. Step 3, our new average transaction size is now just 400 bytes. Now, look at the math that happens next. A 20% reduction in data size doesn't just mean a 20% increase in capacity. Counterintuitively, shrinking the transaction by 20% mathematically yields a massive 25% increase in total throughput per block. Think about it. If you have a 1 megabyte block, dividing it by 400 bytes yields 25% more transactions than dividing it by 500 bytes. You've essentially just made the bucket hold 25% more value without making the bucket itself physically larger. How cool is that? But wait, it gets even better. Not only does our throughput go up, but that smaller data load reduces raw transmission time. If you push a 1 megabyte block through a 5 megabit per second link, it takes about 1.6 seconds of raw transmission latency. But with our 20% smaller data load per transaction, that same block template is effectively only 800 kilobytes. That cuts raw transmission down to just 1.28 seconds. So we get faster transmission, faster block validation, and, crucially, a whole lot less spilled water.
Finally, Section 5, Synergistic Network Effects.
A final inspection of our plumbing reveals that these small tweaks don't just happen in a vacuum. They combine dynamically. As you continue exploring our programs across the curriculum, you're going to see this pattern pop up constantly. When you combine compact block relays, which send tiny, efficient identifiers instead of full transactions, with smaller witness bytes, and high mempool overlap where nodes already know most of the transactions, you create a massive, compounding effect. And this brilliantly illustrates the core philosophy of scaling decentralized networks. As this quote notes, small protocol and implementation gains combine synergistically. Ultimately, these optimizations don't just add up, they multiply. By smartly compressing data and organizing how it flows, we get a faster, higher capacity network without needing physically larger pipes or larger buckets that might literally price everyday users out of running their own node. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. How will you apply this pipes and buckets model to evaluate future block size proposals? The next time you hear someone suggest just increasing the block size, you can ask them about their headroom, their pipes, and their spilled water. Keep this mental blueprint handy for our next lesson, where we'll look at actual block size handling. Thank you so much for joining me, and be sure to visit forge.college to learn more about this subject and dive deeper into other incredible Web3 topics. Keep learning, keep building, and I'll see you in the next Explain.